So the first thing we're going to talk about is understanding land underwriting, the basics of assessing land value, zoning, and environmental considerations to determine potential profitability. Okay? Understanding land. I mean, it's the most basic form of real estate, and it's the most pure form. I love it. I prefer to stay in that asset class just because it keeps it simple. And yeah, it just seems like, where do I even begin with land? So this is a 5-part series. We're going to first talk about understanding it and underwriting it. So first things first, an acre is about the size of a football field or a soccer field. Typically, it's about an acre. So I'm just going to kind of draw this acre and say that's our piece of land. Let's say your grandma Susie has this little piece of land in Wisconsin or Wyoming or Montana, I don't really care. It's got a couple trees on it, it's got a little pond, and she just inherited this thing and is like, I don't know what to do with it. So can you kind of help me? I know that you're plugged in a little bit with real estate. I don't necessarily want to list it with an agent. And you're like, yeah, Grandma Susie, and you have no idea where to begin. So what you want to do is you want to go to places like Zillow, Redfin, let's say Zillow, Home.com, Land.com is a good one. There's a whole lot of them. I'll include those in the bio or the accompanying PDF. But you got to find out what this thing is worth. So you want to go to some of these and you want to find out, hey, what has an acre in this zip code sold for? Maybe in the last 6 months, even the last 9 months or 12 months. You want to get an idea of like, what is this thing truly worth? And the market determines that. So I got an acre and it's got a little pond and it's got a couple trees on it, a little forest. I should draw. There's here, let's do Grandma Susie. She's right there, you know, enjoying her land because she's an American, enjoying land. So basically, you need to figure out what this thing's worth. You go to any of these and you kind of go to the sold section. So you click sold, you go down and there's some filters where you can kind of figure out how many square foot or what's the size of the land. So you want to find your comps, your comparables, your acre properties that have sold in this zip code. Let's say you find one that just sold for 200K. Oh my goodness, my handwriting is horrible. Let's say you find another one that sold for 250K. Now let's say the 250K one didn't have a pond. So this 200K one did have a pond. Now why would a pond make sense as like an adjustment up or down in value? Sometimes this little piece of land, if you were to build a house, you wouldn't be able to build right there on that pond. So if that pond is 1/3 of an acre, that's less usable land that you have. So you want to look at these adjustments that you're making as you're comping. And other times, if you're selling to a recreational buyer, like someone who really wants hunting land or fishing land or duck ponds or whatever, they really want the pond, so it might actually increase the value. I know it's one of those things you're like, how do I know when to increase up or down? Well, it comes back to your comps. You know, did you find one that had a pond that sold for 250, or did you find one that had a pond that sold for 200? So you just kind of work through your comps. You want to find ideally like upwards of 3 or 4 comps that are similar. They don't have to be perfect matches, but you want them to be similar. So find a couple of other acre properties that have sold that are similar to what you've got your eye on to kind of get an idea of what we're going for. Another thing, how close in proximity do you want those to be? Ideally, you would draw a circle on a map. Grandma Susie's is right here. There's a road there. Most ideally, you'd find the comp right next to it. But as we know, that's not how real estate works. So even if it's, you know, a mile away, 2 miles away, this is a map. You just kind of want to get an idea of like, is it in the same county? Is it in the same school zone? And then some other things that you need to take into account are obviously proximity to schools, proximity to grocery stores. All those things kind of come in as adjustments to valuing land. So if it's a little bit further out, you want to kind of at least see how do we see like what's similar and what's not. So let's say they're in the same county, but they're in other school zones. Like I just worked a piece of land last summer that was it was a Gilbert, South Carolina. It was a Gilbert school zone, but it wasn't in, like the address was Leesville, and that was like a $20,000 difference. And you can find this out by what I was going to say is after you've got an idea, a rough of like, okay, it's somewhere between 200 and 250,000, and you've got Grandma Susie, like, okay, we can make this work. Ideally, you'd be kind of under contract or at least a verbal handshake. If it's family, you can be a little bit more lax, but if it's a real life seller, ideally you would get under contract so that you can kind of be like, all right, if it's 250, I want to be around the 100 to maybe 125 range. Ideally, you'd be at about half, 50%. I mean, really, you could do 45% to 60% of market value. That's really where you want to be. That's a safe spot to play in. And then once you have it under contract, basically you have a piece of paper that says, I, Grandma Susie, am allowing you, Nathan, to buy this property, blah, blah, blah. It's super simple. I'll include that in the accompanying PDF. There's plenty of templates, but we use one it's super simple and easy. And if you find things that are weird after you open title, like, hey, there's a bunch of, Indian grave sites or burial grounds, I actually can't build on like this half of the land, then you're really only buying a half of an acre. So those are all things that your attorney is going to kind of find out. You'll find out during feasibility and all that. So anyways, once you get it under contract, you want to go to the top 3 agents in this county that are actively selling land. And I'll show you how to look those up. You see the top 3 agents that are actively selling 1-acre properties in this county, and you give them a call and say, hey, Realtor Joe, I've got this property I'm looking at. I really am having a tough time figuring out what this thing's actually worth and what I should buy it for. I was wondering if you could give me an opinion of value. If I wanted to sell this thing in 90 to 120 days, what do you think that you would list it at for me? And they'll go back and forth. They'll do this whole thing over and again, but they have other tools that you don't necessarily have access to as just a regular person. If they're a true land selling agent who actually is doing active deals in the county. So they'll give you an idea of like, hey, Grandma Susie's lot, if you want to sell that thing within 90 days, you're going to want to be priced at maybe, let's say they say 175K. And let's say that the next realtor you call says, well, I would list it at 150K. And then the next realtor says, well, I'd list it at 175K. So ideally, in a most ideal situation, you would have 3 different realtors that kind of give you this idea, and you'd get that in writing. You'd get it in some kind of email correspondence. You'd get it in text. They're used to this. They don't like working for free. But, if you're just straight up and honest, you know how honesty is the best policy. You can say like, hey, look, I want to continue doing deals in this county. This isn't like a one-time deal. So I'm hoping that we can kind of form a mutually beneficial relationship. Most realtors who are hungry, they get the game, they understand what you're trying to do. So they'll give you an idea. So let's say it's like you comped out at 200 to 250. You've got Grandma Susie at 125, and the realtors are telling you around the 150 to 175 range. You might have to say, Grandma Susie, I was a little ambitious. I think because of X, Y, and Z, pond, burial grounds, whatever you can find, there's plenty of ways to find things that are wrong with land. You don't necessarily need to beat up the property, but most of the times when you're talking to sellers, Grandma Susie's pretty motivated. She's like, just take this thing off my hands. I haven't stepped foot on it in 15, 20 years. I inherited this. I have no ties to it. So whatever you need to do, like a $15,000 to $20,000 difference isn't that big of a deal as long as I get this thing off my hands and I don't have to keep paying taxes on it. So you get an idea. You might have to retrade with Grandma Susie, but then once you agree on a number that, you've got some actual comps from realtors that have given you your opinion of value, and you've kind of comped it and done some of your basic underwriting, you can then go get an actual contract that's like legit, you're comfortable with it, and then you open title with an attorney. At least where I do business in the state of South Carolina, my attorney, he'll take it and he'll start to do all the title work. He'll start to make sure that all the title work is clean, that there's no liens or anything like that. If they have any kind of encumbrances or any kind of right-of-ways that go across it or anything like that, they typically find that and they tell you, hey, here's the situation with this property. Takes my guy a week or 2 at most. He can expedite it and do it quick. So just keep that in mind. So on this contract, you want like 90, 120, maybe even 240 days to like really truly do your research. So that all comes back clear and open, and your attorney says, yeah, we're good. There's nothing hairy about this. Then you might go ahead and say, okay, well, just to make sure, I want to get this property surveyed. So you basically hire a guy to come out to Grandma Susie's land, and this guy comes out and he's got binoculars, and he basically like looks at the property and says, okay, yep, this is actually an acre. They make sure they do all the wetland delineation studies. They can do everything for you. Sometimes you might have to pay them a little bit extra to expedite that process. I know that right now And some of the counties we're working on, they're like 2-3 months out, which doesn't really work unless you do like a 120 to 200 day close. So there's, guys, we can get so creative with like the contract on, you know, seller financing and all that. We'll get to that. But that's the basic understanding of how to get an idea on Grandma Susie's piece of land. Now, something else you want to consider is the average per acre price, and that differs per county. That is so important, guys. I know that sometimes, almost every time in a county, if I'm going to go out and buy a 1 acre home site, I can expect 1 acre home site to be about $50K. Okay? And that's all you got to do is see, like, go onto Zillow or whatever, go to the land filter, whatever you like to use, and see, okay, what can I buy an acre for here? And you can find a 1 acre home site for, let's say, $50K. Now, if I up this to, let's say, 10 acres, I'm going to go look for a 10 acre piece of land. Sometimes you can find that for a little bit less than $50K an acre. So let's say you find a 10 acre piece for $250K. So what happens here is you can find your 1 acre price is $50,000 per acre. Your 10 acre piece, it might have a $25,000 per acre price. You get that math? It's pretty simple. Like, if you buy more, you get a little bit more of a discount. That's just the way that the market kind of fluctuates. Now, I'm going to include some tools in the description below where you'll be able to kind of go find this data per county and kind of compare that, have that on your, the back of your mind, so that when a lead comes in, when Grandma Susie's property comes in, you can say, okay, well, just off the top of my head, Grandma Susie, I know that in this county for 1 acre properties, I can expect to pay about $50K. So I'm actually going to buy it from you for about $25,000 to $30,000. And that gives you an idea when you get your average per acre price. That's just a rough number. Now, we haven't even gotten into utilities. We haven't even gotten into like the grade of the land and some of the features that can add or take away value from a specific property. But do we have a pretty clear understanding on this so far? What questions do you have for me before we go?
I have a question. I don't think it's necessarily...
Just throw it out there.
So with your saying when you have Susie's contract with her, are you wanting to put it under like value? So like if the property's worth $200,000, but you want to be in contract written it as like $100,000, $150,000, so you can make a profit?
Absolutely, yeah. So what we're talking about here is flipping land parcels. You're going to actually buy this property, turn around and sell it at a profit. Ideally, you would have enough wiggle room to where if you wanted to offer an incentive to a buyer to be like, hey, look, if you can close early with cash, I'll give you a $5,000 discount. Or if you can, let's say if you can come in, well, actually, hypothetically, here's a really good example. So we had a property that we were going to flip, and we got it under contract at a great deal. However, we had this situation when we opened title. This property's never been surveyed, so they were having a real tough time like confirming that we could actually buy it, and it was like free and clear and marketable, and it was easy for like a clean transaction. So we went and got some quotes from surveyors, and that ended up being like $8,000 or $9,000 and like a 6 to 8 week lead time. And that's why in your contract you want to kind of bake in enough time and Grandma Susie to be like, yep, you can do what you want, you can hire people, you can act as if you're the property owner. They call it power of attorney. Sometimes you can work that in where you're like, look, this might take me a lot longer, but I'll be able to get you the most money for your property by you giving me control, or by you seller financing it, or whatever you do. You can kind of work that in and get real creative with the contract. Ideally, what we're doing is we're solving Miss Susie's problem and being a perfect solution, but also solving a problem for us, making a couple of bucks on the deal. And it might end up being that you buy this property and you try to list it and it doesn't sell. Hardly the case when you buy it at such a discount, and you can get it, professionally photographed. Maybe if you're going to spend money, you get someone to go in there and do some basic grading to show a home site, a little road, or some timber, some clearing. There's all sorts of things you can do to help accelerate the movement of that property. So, hope that answers that question. What else? You got one for me? You got one for me?
No. I'm ready for the next.
All right. So now that you kind of have an idea on how to get a grasp on how to value land, we'll move on to the next segment. The most important parts here, guys, are let people do what they're good at Agents know what they're doing. They know the area. When you find the top performing agents and you build super good rapport with them, then they can go do their job and they'll tell you what it's worth, and then you can get an idea of what do I need to buy this thing at. So hopefully that answers any questions. If you've got any, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Let's move on to our next section.